Hey everybody. So after posting on my page a few days ago about if anyone would like to see how I rig my Golden Spates paddletail right here on a drop shot, I got some pretty good feedback of some people wanting to see how I have it rigged up. Um, so I figured I'd do a short video of just kind of the equipment that I'm using, how I have mine rigged, and then some just basics of how I fish it. That being said, first things first, there's so many different ways to rig a drop shot. There's a ton of videos out there of people doing it different ways. I'm just going to show you what has worked for me and, from trial and error, and maybe it'll help you. So, first things first, I'll kind of talk about my equipment that I'm using here. So I use a 6'9" Berkeley Emotion rod. It's a medium moderate action rod. It's worked really well for me. I've caught a ton of fish on it. Has good sensitivity and a good backbone. I've got that paired up with a 2500 series Shimano reel, and I'm using 10-pound, braid backing, and with a 8-pound fluorocarbon leader. Right now, I'm actually using the P-line Fluoroclear, so it's actually a fluorocarbon coated copolymer. I've been really happy with it so far, though. I feel like I've got some good sensitivity and good abrasion resistance. Plus, it's really cheap. I got 300 yards of it for like $8. So I'm going to keep using it until I have a reason to switch back to the Seaguar Red Label or something of that nature, or unless I can just find some for a really good deal. I've typically, so real simple, I tie a uni to uni knot to get my braid and my, my other line, together. I've had good success with that knot. I've had several times where the line actually breaks just before the knot, so I'm pretty confident in it and not too worried about having any issues with that. So first things first, I just use a Palomar knot to attach my hook. As far as a hook, I prefer to use anywhere from a size 1 to a size 4 Gamakatsu octopus hook. It's been my favorite so far. Haven't had any issues with them straightening out or anything else. I tried to use some cheaper hooks and unfortunately lost some good fish by it. So once again, you kind of get what you pay for. So first things first, my line is heading up towards the reel, towards the rod, and then I've got the end of the line here. So I want my hook facing up the line instead of traditionally how I would just tie it on. So that's one of the first things that I learned, because otherwise your hook ends up facing down or however you want it. And, if I've learned that when I have it facing up with a Palomar knot, almost all the time I'm hooking them right in the top of the mouth. So I get a good solid hook penetration, and it's a lot harder for them to throw that hook. So I take my line and I'm just going to feed it through once and bring it out about 12 inches or so, and then I take the tag line again back through the eye, and then from there, once I have it kind of doubled over, I'm just doing a simple overhand knot. So bringing my loop back through and then bringing the hook through that loop. And once I pull it tight, give it a little bit there. And I always check my knot to make sure it didn't get stuck anywhere and that it looks good and clean. And then from there, I've got my tag line. So if I was just to leave it like this, as you can see, the hook's facing down, which is the opposite of what I said earlier, that we wanted it facing up. So what I do is I just take my tag line, go back through the eye, back through the hook facing the way I want. And then once I pull it straight and get that knot to kind of pop through the eye of the hook, now it's going to be straight up and down the way I want it. And my hook's going to stay there. It's not going to move very much. Typically at this point, you're wanting to choose your weight. I've got a ton of guys that I know that I fish with that fish drop shot that just to save some money, just take a simple bank weight or something like that and tie it on. I really do prefer the drop shot weights because I like having the drop shot keeper, so I can actually adjust my line, especially if it's a lake I haven't patterned in a while, or if it's first time fishing it. I'll leave extra tag line, that way I can easily kind of adjust the length of my of my weight from the bottom till I figure out kind of what those fish are going after, because it really does make a difference. There's times where I've got my tag line 6 inches. I've got times when I'm almost got it 2 feet. It just depends on where the fish are at. The next thing, round ball versus, the cylinder. It just depends on where I'm fishing. If I'm fishing a lot of, rock and that kind of stuff, most of the time I'll use the cylinder just because it tends to not get hung up as bad. But if I'm fishing anything that's, grass or mud or sandy, I'll just use a round ball. Round balls are a little bit easier to come by. And I typically try to go with the lightest weight I can possibly get away with. Most of the time you're going to see me fishing an 1/8 ounce, which is what I got, right here. And it's, it's been one of my favorites. I still have good feel with it. And the reason I like it is whenever that bait is on its drop, it doesn't just sink like a rock. It kind of flutters down a little bit, gives it a little bit more lifelike action, and I feel like that makes a significant difference. There's a lot of guys out there fishing with 1/4 ounce, 1/2 ounce, that kind of stuff, and to me, I for most of the water I fish, it's not necessary. Most of the time, if I'm in 20 foot or less, I'm going with an 1/8 ounce, and the only time I ever really go any more than that is whenever I'm fishing deeper water and I need to get, a little bit better contact, and then I'll kind of bump it up to, 3/16 or something like that. So just for purposes here, I've got my weight, and, whenever I've got it on the bottom, this is kind of the presentation I'm going for. More of a vertical presentation, that hook facing up, so that when that fish goes to bite, that hook is going to hit in the top of their lip, and you'll have good connection. There's a lot of people that talk to me about how I actually have my bait on my hook. You'll see most videos, they'll recommend to go through the tip like this and then bring it down, and that works well for a lot of people. The benefits of this is typically, even when it hook slides, you don't lose a lot of that presentation. For whatever reason, I've just always hooked it just through the bottom. If you can see there, just through the bottom and through the top. And that's how I like it. I like nose hooking because it allows this bait to have a ton of action. Though if I'm ever in heavy cover, I will still hook this same way with just a 1/0 worm hook and almost Texas rig this bait onto it, and it'll give it a kind of a weedless protection. Also, I'll do that if I ever have issues where I can feel that fish is picking up the bait at the back and they're not really eating it, they're just kind of grabbing it, and then when I'm going to set the hook, I'm just pulling it out. I'll use that 1/0 because then it's going to push my hook point back to here, so that when they have it in their mouth, I can normally hook them. So that's another tip, that if you're ever out there and you're feeling them pick it up and you can feel it, and you go to set that hook and then all of a sudden there's nothing, give that a try. It's worked for me several times when those fish are being a little finicky. So how I fish it is real simple. Most people make the misconception that with a drop shot, you have to, fish deep water, you're vertical jigging, and you're just sitting there, bouncing that rod up and down. I honestly hardly ever fish it that way. I do occasionally, but most of the time I'm actually fishing it more like I would, a football jig or something. I'm finding a stretch that I want to fish, and I'm making a cast out to it, and I'm going to leave my bail open until I know that that weight is all the way at the bottom. I'm going to close the bail and reel up just enough that I can, not have slack line, and I'm going to sit there and twitch it, and then kind of pause it, and I'm going to reel down a little bit and lift it up to bring it towards me, and then let it drop back down, and then twitch it, and just kind of work my way back. The biggest thing is work it extremely slow. A lot of the times that fish will sit there and follow it and follow it and follow it until, a certain way you're twitching it or pausing it causes them to go ahead and bite. Don't be afraid to cast around structure. Some of my best fish came off of, casting next to a lay down or something like that. But just fair warning, you are going to go through a lot of weights and a lot of hooks just because you are dealing with light tackle. Rocks and that kind of stuff are going to nick at your tag line, causing you to break off a hook whenever it gets stuck. All those kinds of things. So just kind of be aware of that. Don't get frustrated if you're breaking stuff off left and right. I normally bring a couple of dozen hooks with me and a bunch of weights because I just know I'm going to break off eventually. And it's a finesse technique, but it definitely lands a lot of fish. If you have any questions or anything like that, reach out to me. Be more than happy to help you. Once again, the bait that I use a lot is the Golden's paddletail. I always make sure on this bait, I want the flat part of the tail to be level. So whenever when I'm out there fishing, and that bait is like this, that flat part of the tail is flat, and when I lift, it'll catch a lot of the water and give it action. Whereas if I had it turned, I'm not going to catch as much water. But it's a great bait. Caught a ton of fish all over with it. Anything from smallmouth, largemouth, spotted bass, catfish, crappie, you name it. Just about everything bites this bait. And don't be afraid to try this technique on the river either, because it's really nice when you're in a little bit of a current. That weight will stick and it'll allow this bait to really move freely and look like a bait fish swimming in the current. So give it a try. Try this bait out. Let me know what you think. If you have any questions, just reach out to me. Have a good one.